So I'm going to share a little bit about Leah. So Leah Davis is a dedicated wealth and wellness coach for entrepreneurial women of color. Leah has a deep commitment and profound awareness of how to support her clients as they achieve economic stability while navigating the unique challenges of business ownership. With a focus on educating her clients about wealth gap and how it's impacted them as women of color, Leah assists women with simple solutions to increase their liquid savings, access high quality credit, and obtain business capital to enhance their wealth building strategies. Leah was a seasoned financial advisor before beginning her career as a wealth and wellness coach. She enjoyed preparing her clients as they maneuvered the intricacies of managing their finances, their finance lives, while fostering a foundation of generational wealth building. Leah is actually a certified domestic violence advocate and brings a trauma-informed approach to her work with women. She understands the complexities of gender-based violence, addiction, substance abuse, and recovery. Leah strives to create a safe space for women to feel seen and heard as she guides them towards economic empowerment. And her business is actually a proven method of supporting entrepreneurial women of color as they work through their healing path from trauma and build a solid foundation for generational wealth. This is actually achieved by discussing money management habits, creating action plans, accountability, partnership, and increasing their financial knowledge. So Leah provides a holistic approach of physical, emotional, and even spiritual focus to guide clients towards feeling safe with money as they create a sustainable pattern to attain short-term and long-term economic stability. So with that being said, Leah, I just want to welcome you to our space. I think folks will continue to trickle in. Oh, yeah, there are folks here. But I just, want to turn it over to you and just give you a heartfelt thank you and welcome.
Thank you for having me, Jamie. I appreciate being here so much. And as she's reading that about my bio and everything, I'm sitting here thinking like, that's me? Because I tell you, about 7 or 8 years ago, I would have never imagined that I'd be where I'm at today. And I'll share that in a little bit. And today's topic is something that is very near and dear to my heart. I am a woman who has experienced childhood domestic violence and intimate partner violence throughout my life. And for the first time in my life now, I can truly say that I am not riddled with chronic, that brain fog that you're talking about. I got that today too. Crisis, being in crisis. And it's a beautiful feeling. And it's amazing because all things are possible. And so first though, I wanted to start out by saying, feel free to chat, chime in, ask questions as I'm speaking, unmute yourself. I don't mind. It's not about the Leah show, where I'm just going to be completely talking and just throwing a ton of information at you. I'm very much all about wanting to hear from you and receiving your insight and questions, because this is something that feels it's not one that's discussed very much when it comes to violence, specifically domestic violence that women have experienced in children, and money, and then how that can impact our ability to experience freedom. And I don't want to focus just on financial freedom or wealth freedom, because it's all interconnected. So that's why I have a holistic approach to my work. So why don't I go ahead and show you a little picture of this girl, and I'll explain to you who she is. Can you see her there? I was going to put on a slide, and I didn't use a slide. Here's a PDF, but you can see her. Yeah. Who is that? Oh,
like you.
That's me. I'm 4 years old in that picture. This picture right here sits on my dresser. And when I've had times in my life where I was needing to speak to that scared girl, this is the picture that I go to. This picture has a lot of meaning. First, you see I'm dressed to the nines. I'm going to church more than likely. I was raised in a very strict household. My parents were devout Jehovah's Witnesses. And all the books that you see behind me on that bookshelf is literature from the Jehovah's Witness religion. That is a key element to a form of, violence that I did experience within that community, which I'm no longer a part of. But why this is so significant to me is because you wouldn't know that I was growing up in a household where there was violence happening, and it was towards me and towards my brothers. My father, he was abusive, right? So he wasn't it wasn't the yelling and screaming. So when we think of domestic violence and what children are exposed to, it doesn't necessarily always have to be the hitting, the spanking, the other things. It could just be parents arguing and fighting all the time and being exposed to that. Well, that wasn't happening in our house. As a matter of fact, it was opposite. My parents, you didn't hear them arguing. My father had such a commanding presence, and he was so scared. I'm sure my mom, I look back now, she's 5'2". I'm half black and half Mexican. My mom's Mexican, so she's 5'2", petite Mexican. My father's this like 6'2", very large black male, right? And he was scary when he was in his mode. So I didn't grow up in that necessarily environment, but I did grow up with a sense of fear, because if I wasn't perfect, if I didn't respond perfectly, if we were walking too close to my father and in front of him, we had to walk behind him. I learned at a very young age that we had to be all lined up, pressed, ready to go to church on the couch without my father having to ask us. And if we were not, then he would leave, and that would mean we would be at home waiting the entire time, knowing that when he came home, the consequences of us not being ready, we were going to be harmed. And, I can speak about this now, and I'm not a mess. There was a point in time in my life where I couldn't talk about this. Or if I did, it was very disconnected. I remember I mentioned some of the things that happened to me to some friends when I was in my 20s, even 30s. And I'm just talking, and the looks on their faces, when I shared something and I'm thinking like, oh, I guess they don't, yeah, that happened to us. Even now, I recently shared to a friend on a car ride about a month ago, and he was just like appalled hearing when I shared how our life was at home. But why this image is important is because I learned at a very young age is that I had to act like everything was okay and have this demeanor and move through the world with the blinders on. And that was my coping strategy at that young age. I know that now. I didn't know it, 10 years ago, because my coping strategy then, putting blinders on things, was drinking a lot and just avoiding things that were stressing me out, which happened to be money, also relationships then as well. So that coping strategy is something that I've carried with me throughout my whole life. And it's actually turned into a superpower now, so, but there's a way to get there. And that's the awakening part for me. Everybody's at a different place when this occurs. For me, it started with really wanting to I know it started with looking around me and seeing that what other people had in their lives, there was something missing. Like I just couldn't get there. Like I look like it, I look the part, walk the walk, talk the talk, but inside I would just look around me and, and people's lives just seemed to be shooting on past mine, and I'm just staying in this one place, and it was like Groundhog Day, that movie Groundhog Day. Kept the same year. I was like, well, I didn't accomplish what I said I wanted to accomplish. Another year's passed. I said I would do X, Y, and Z, that I would do, have this much money. I would do all these different things. And it's the same thing. I didn't know at that time that there was the healing that was needed for me to be able to experience that life. And it took for me leaving a relationship that I was in for almost 8 years, my second relationship as an adult, where there was intimate partner violence. It was verbal, physical, some verbal, emotional, sometimes physical, narcissistic behaviors, and I, I got out of the relationship. It was one of those things where my mom says, when a woman is done, she's done. And I was done. And I'd already tried a few times prior to, over the course of almost 8 years, trying to leave, but I would go back. And I mean, crazy things happened, and I would still go back. And that's what happens. That's what we do. It was very familiar for me, because stepping into another world where I didn't have that familiar feeling of that chronic stress was stressful, right? So it just kept happening. So what I didn't realize at that time is all I knew at that time is I wanted the pain to stop. I remember that. I just wanted the pain to stop. I didn't know that I was seeking peace. I just wanted it to stop. little did I know on this journey of mine that that was just the beginning of some big pain. And I've noticed this, that when a woman has, a lot of women that I've worked with and seen in other communities with survivors, and we're convening, is they leave the situation and the desire is for things to get better, and it can get worse. There's a variety of reasons why. In my particular situation, I had an individual who was going to use the court system and their position as a white male in law enforcement to continue to perpetuate their abuse towards me. And, so my life just went down, right? Because I thought I was going to be able to step away from this and feel better. And yet it was still that sense of impending doom that I had learned from a child because of uncertainty, not knowing what would happen in life. It was still following me, that sense of impending doom, like something bad's going to happen. And I'm always feeling like I'm running, just that surviving skill mode, right? I'm going to stop my share there. Okay. I'm reading here. All right. Coping is being a workaholic. Okay. So busy, moving, right? Some people, the coping is control, got to control the situation. Some people, it's the caregiving. Some people, it's the taking, like take. Some people drive stuff, there's a variety of things, right? And so for me, mine was putting the blinders on and then I would numb myself out. But I also know now that that'll happen because I didn't know how to manage. No one taught me about emotions, it was just stuff everything inside and act like everything's okay, move on. So anyway, back to my awakening part and what I've learned and have seen with so many of my sisters who have left relationships. And then if there's children involved, back and forth, and how that can continue with the abuse, right? And sometimes the former spouse will use the court system to continue that, right? And it can happen and last a long time. During a 7-year journey for me, as I'm going through this process, as I'm working on trying to understand why things are not getting better, I came to the conclusion, like, okay, I'm going to stop drinking, which is why I understand the complexities for women when it comes to substance abuse. That was happening, right? I wasn't somebody who was like dependent on it, but it definitely was there as a crutch. And, once I put that down and started working in that space and then surrounding myself with other women who were going through something similar and having these kind of conversations, I began to be like, oh, wow, I'm not the only one. I could hear myself in the stories of the other women. And that is a huge part of the becoming aware and conscious of what I experienced. Otherwise, I didn't have anyone around that was talking to me about it. And so many of the women that I support with now, they'll often say I'm the only person that they're sharing these things with, or, they've never talked about some of the things that happened to them in childhood, or, I'm not a therapist, by the way, disclaimer here, I'm not a therapist, but, through my coaching and the methodology of my coaching, that it oftentimes women will share with me some things that happen because it's tied to the visceral response that they're having when it comes to building the life that they dream of, and that was happening to me too. I had all the education, financial advisor, I got my licensing, I'm out trying to build a business. Meanwhile, I'm dealing with all this other harmful things at home and then through the court system. And I had trouble believing that I could do and be who I felt I could be, but I just didn't know how to get there. Add into, though, I mentioned, being raised as Jehovah's Witness, a very controlling environment. Within that religion and within the home atmosphere, there were no conversations about dreams, goals, no conversation about going to college, money, nothing. So it's amazing to me when I think about that. Like, I grew up in an environment where there was absolutely no desire to mold us and build us for us to believe that we could be something more. So add in that, and if I wanted to try to go do that, the people within that religious group would look down on anyone who was trying to, make something of themselves, because how dare you, the mentality is, we don't have a lot. We're here to serve God only, and that's all that matters. And the world's going to end. so doesn't matter. So I grew up with, again, with that mentality of around me of, it doesn't matter. Money's not, it doesn't matter. Money, don't put any effort into it. It's not important, So, I mean, throw all that in there and then add in being raised in an environment and the way that I was treated, right? What is that? We're also learning about how trauma affects, yes, how trauma affects financial behavior. Correct. Oh, you're learning that right now?
Yeah, I am barely after all these years.
Okay. It's okay. You're arriving. You're becoming aware of it, right? Yes, trauma does impact financial behavior. I can give an example of that too. So I have a client right now who is she was having difficulty being able to put money in the bank. And she would she makes good money, but she would like have a little bit there, but she'd have so much stashed at home. And, it was interesting, and speaking with her, it's kind of, and she said, no, what was, she was like, she'd check her bank account, the one that she did have a lot, every day, just a lot. And I, wondering, just the way she described them, thinking there's some people where I would ignore it. It's not there. And there's other people where it's like constantly, or somewhere in the middle. So she was constantly every day. And I asked her, when you're checking your account, how are you experiencing that? And she's like, oh, I'm stressed out. I was like, okay, how is that stress showing up in your body? So pay attention here. Think of when you're going through your finances and things, how it's showing up in your body, or when you're thinking of what you want to accomplish, whether in your career vocation, your business, or something where it means you're the one that's going to be the driver's seat. Like, how is it showing up for you when you think of these things, or looking at documents? And so she let me know that she's feeling it in her chest. It was like really tight. And so we had a conversation about that. And it turns out she's been experiencing that for many years since she was little. And it turns out for her, it was being homeless. So, just being homeless and not having money and having money, not having money. And so for her way of trying to cope things, control the situation, keep looking at her account to make sure everything's there. But at the same time, it's not serving her because she's not making any movement. It's just this cycle. And so this is another part of the awakening when you move to the healing part, which is reducing exposure to the things that are causing you to be re-traumatized. So she didn't make the connection that every time throughout the day, she kept looking at her bank, her account online, she's like re-traumatizing herself. And so when I phrased it to her that way, it's just like a light bulb went off and she's like, oh, I don't want to do that. And so consider for yourself if there's anything like that, if that's for any of you here that's making a connection for you, there's something that's occurring in your life right now that you're working towards, or you think if there's something that you're continuing to do and it's wreaking havoc on you physically, you feel it mentally, you feel drained, you feel anxious or something, that's the little ding, ding, ding that, something's going on there. And to maybe pay attention to that and reduce exposure to it. So with this client, what we did is, okay, let's come to an agreement. Probably not going to stop looking at her bank account, however, setting specific amounts during the week, how many times during the week, that's where she started. And now, she doesn't have to even check it every week. It's like every other week a little bit, because through working together, we've come up with different systems for her so she knows where money is. And she's worked through a lot of that. And so now, she's not riddled with that throughout the day, because then that can show up and manifest in all kinds of other ways, right? When we're going to work, when we're trying to be with family or friends. And for me, when I am in that space, I become very argumentative. I'll argue. That's what shows up for me when I'm not in alignment with what I want to experience every day. That peace that I was talking about that I have now that I didn't have before. Back then, oh man, I just think, 7 years ago, man, if you'd seen me, I was queen of arguing. I had no problem arguing with you. But now I don't like to argue. I really don't. I'll do it if I need to. Don't get me wrong, but at the same time, fight, respond. Yeah, I'm a fighter. I also have 2 older brothers, and we were talking about it a couple of weekends ago. They were rough with me, but and that's why I had no problem like fighting back. Not necessarily good, especially if you were drinking. So those days are gone. I'm now a different person, and I'm who I always wanted to be. I just didn't know how to get there, right? So yeah, definitely the flight response with that. I want to make sure that I'm on track here. So yeah, reducing the exposure to these things. So it could also be like your home environment. It could be even if you're in a work environment. I have a client now who didn't realize that her job, she kept going into this position every day and couldn't function. And it was because she was a survivor of assault, and the individual at work had a voice similar to somebody that had harmed her. And so she ended up leaving that job. But now, as she's looking for another job, she's considering the fact on making sure her environment is one where she can thrive. And she now knows, if I'm in an environment where I'm feeling activated, then finding a way to have a safety plan within that environment as much as possible, not engaging with certain people, sit in a certain place, or I don't know, just depends, so that she can go ahead and be able to move forward and be able to work and earn an income. Because that's something that I think folks also miss, is that our work environment, if we're not thriving there and if we're being activated and triggered, we're not able to focus, to feel productive. That comes along even with our finances. When we have those financial stressors, we're not able to focus, we're not really productive, we can have all this stress, and then that bleeds out into our work, and even for business owners as well. So professionally at a career, or at a job, or as a business owner. So yeah, part of the healing process as well is like finding your tribe and community. Has anyone here, I'm curious, is anybody here, I'm just curious, you don't have to, you can put a thumbs up or put in the chat. Has anyone been to or in any group settings with women where there are other survivors and you've been in that community having conversation? I started that journey, which is what prompted me to become a domestic violence advocate, because I really wanted to be able to put context to what it was that I experienced as a child and as an adult and how it was showing up. And being in that community with other women, and that's being facilitated by another woman who is now trained, who's also experienced the violence, and just having that place to be while I was still going through things with my abuser from that relationship was so helpful, because I was able to hear from other women who had walked in my shoes already and were at a place where I wanted to be. And then also being in that circle, hearing other women who are in situations where I used to be, right? And then just hearing that as a reminder of, and also wanting to be of a place of comfort for her. And just having those kind of safe spaces and conversation is definitely something that, if you or women have experienced any violence towards you, is to find that community. And it can do wonders, because otherwise it can be very isolating and we feel alone. And when that's going on and we're just really wanting to just elevate our life, when we're feeling alone and we're already isolated, it just kind of catapults things, makes things really difficult to move forward. Any questions or anything over what I'm chatting about? Comments, thoughts?
I'll go ahead and
Yeah.
to your question, unfortunately, I haven't been in a group of other women in a structured setting. I've been with some of my sisters, my cousins,
Yeah.
where we get together and things like that might come up, but it's never been like in a structured, like.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. And it may not be for everyone, right? And I don't know what's necessarily available in your area. There are some groups online. And I actually went to one meeting like a year ago because I was dealing with some stuff, and it was one of the things like, I gotta be in that community. And it was an online group, and I just went to one session and I had one woman say one thing, and then that's just all I needed to hear. And for me in that moment, to help me regain my footing. But yeah, the group environment, when there is one that's facilitated by an advocate, Ty says, I've not been in a group of women. I've done one over Zoom, but now it's in person and it's too far for me. Oh, I'm so sorry, Ty, it's too far. I hope they can maybe do it online still. Yeah, so I was saying, like, just being able to put context to what experience, and hearing these stories and learning about things is definitely a huge part of my healing journey. Like I said, it might not be for everyone, but what it does is it just normalizes things. And even though, and it's like, otherwise people don't talk about it. And when it's facilitated by somebody who has been trained to have these conversations and to hold that space, and it just is a different experience. I mean, I've had therapy, I've had a therapist one-on-one, right? But my therapist isn't exactly sharing with me a story that I can relate to that is going to help me today. It's different when I can hear somebody else, kind of going through something or explain something they experienced, and I might be going through something in that moment. It's just so helpful to be able to have that. And then I also kind of like how Jamie met me, and then now she's, I'm here today, right? I've made some amazing connections in these circles of some women. Even when I was becoming domestic violence advocate, I had no plan on, making friends and stuff, but there's other women now who are in the community. We all got certified together, learning about all these different parts of, domestic violence and in a different way, right? And so now we have that community as well. And that's just so, I really can't say enough about the healing part of that. And so when we have that awakening, right, I shared with you about, my path to get there, my awakening, the things that I started doing, reducing exposure, letting go of the alcohol. I had a new circle of friends, and really started working on my healing and focusing on myself. I had therapy. I just did a complete overhaul of my life. And the reason for that was because I really wanted to create an environment for my children to thrive and to have a peaceful home. So it wasn't until I was 40 years old, or I could say I'm 43, where I could say I have a peaceful home environment. I take that back. Wait, 39. I'm aging myself up, right? Where I finally was able to create this environment of where I walk in the door and it's just absolutely peaceful. Mind you, I did leave the relationship in 2013, but between 2013 and 2018, I was trying to rebuild my life. So that's what I was talking about. Sometimes that linear path of I'm just going to be from here to get there, it doesn't work that way. And that's part of the process, and everybody's journey is different. So those hardships and things that I experienced have brought me to where I'm at today, right? And I do have a peaceful home. And my goal was, because I wanted to ensure that my children had a place to walk into where they felt safe. And I did too. I mean, because I didn't have that growing up. And then I didn't have that as an adult. So, here I am, and I have this now. And what I've learned over time, and what happens too, is there's different areas that come up over time that are the pillars of wellness. So there's the physical wellness, right? There's the mental and emotional wellness. There's spiritual wellness. There's financial wellness. There's relationship wellness. There's all these different things. Not all of them happen all at the same time. And we may not even be ready for certain aspects of it. So for me, I wasn't ready for the spiritual wellness because I didn't even have a spiritual side for the longest time, but I was ready for the emotional wellness. And so that's where I started. I started with a therapist. And from there, I moved into having a spiritual wellness aspect of myself, and learning that, it's not, there's something greater here in this world, whether we call it God, the universe, spirit, outline. There's all kinds of names for it. The trees, the butterflies. I don't know. We can call it whatever, right? Don't discriminate on what you want to call it, but there's something greater here for us. And building a relationship with that and trusting. And trust is also one of the most fundamental parts of what is so very difficult for those of us that have experienced childhood domestic violence and intimate partner violence in our lives. Trust in ourselves, trust in others, trust in life, trust, just the word trust. I have in my room a picture, and it just has big black words, trust. It's there. It's my reminder. Because how can we learn to trust if we're in an environment where those who are supposed to protect us as children were not protecting us, or we're keep getting exposed to things, and later on in life, we find ourselves in relationships at work or with friends or with people. And again, that trust is severed and we're hurt. So trust is a huge pillar when it comes to being able to experience that harmonious wealth. And when I say the word wealth, it's not just the dollars and the cents and the assets and things. I'm talking about like just the holistic wealth of life, right? Feeling content and satisfied. That in itself is a form of wealth. Like you can't take that away. When that angst and despair has been replaced with feeling satisfied and content and grateful for where we're at. I mean, no one can take that. It's like there's no value that can be put on that. So back to what I was saying about trust, right? To be able to get there is working on little elements of the decisions that we make and knowing that what we experienced, how we're able to navigate life and get ourselves out of situations or to move and do things is that superpower. So, right, let's go back to young Leah in a situation, violence is happening in my life. I put the mask on, act like nothing's happening and move on, right? It didn't serve me for a long time, but now that's a superpower. Because a year ago, I was going through some things with my youngest child and in the father's household, and it was scary. And yet I remember hearing my friends and people close to me saying like, how are you even getting through this? Like, and I couldn't really have an explanation for it other than saying, I'm really taking care of myself. And I was, because I tell you that coping strategy came in full force and effect, which was nothing's happening right now, but it served me well because it wasn't in the toxic way where I was reaching for alcohol or reaching for something else to numb myself out, to make things disappear, act like it's not happening, even though it really was. I was able to use that as a superpower, knowing that all these things are going on, but able to compartmentalize it enough so that it wasn't impacting me throughout my day. So I could take the action I needed to take and do what I needed to do so that ultimately my child would be safe. And it worked. I would not have been able to do this 5, 6, 7 years ago because I hadn't done all the work on being able to, first of all, be aware of what's going on and knowing that, oh, this is showing up and this is how I'm coping with it and it's okay. There's that mental health aspect of things, right? And the word health is in there. So it's a positive thing, right? And so my mental health in that time, even though I had the coping coming through and she came in full force and to protect the little Leah, right? That ignoring is a coping, protect little Leah. And was still happening, but in a way, like I said, that served our greater good. So that's where, if you're thinking of anything that you have, if you're aware of it, I don't know, of anything that you have that you do to cope, right? Then that can be a superpower. That can be a way that, in recognizing like, oh, this is what I'm using right now to get me through this moment in time. And that's what I did then. Another example could be, consider a young child who may be hearing violence or something going on in the home and they get a blanket and they cover their head, right? That's like a coping strategy that can be used later on in life in a way to be able to serve them really well, where they gotta just put their head down, cover themselves up and be okay. But those are brilliant solutions that as young children we come up with that, most people shouldn't have to have the burden of experience. No one should have the burden of experiencing, I should say. But those of us who have experienced it can be such a powerful thing. And when we can rein that in on our journey, when we awaken, when we're healing, then when we're able to rein that in, that's where like we become really harmonious and we're kind of in a flow state, being able to acknowledge like this did happen to me and this is how I work through it. And that's okay because this is who I am. And when we come from that, there's no shame, right? There's no feeling bad about ourselves. This is a part of who I am. All those things happen to me. that's what happened. And this is what I had to go through to get to where I'm at today. And it's okay because, you know, this is how I'm able to show up in the world and be at my best.